the 700 Club. What does it all mean? They're devastating back-to-back natural disasters. The massive earthquake in Mexico that killed more than 200 people yesterday. And today, the Category 5 Hurricane Maria that hit Puerto Rico after crashing into other islands. Wendy, what's going on?
What is going on? That is a question I'm even hearing on secular mainstream media. People are wanting to know. And, you know, a lot of...
I don't have any spiritual understanding of it. If I do, I mean, it hasn't been revealed to me, let's put it that way. But these are horrible storms. Tell us about it.
Well, you know, a lot of people think that it could be the Lord just trying to get our attention, and that perhaps revival is down the road, and we certainly hope that might be the case. But the National Weather Service warned that the hurricane was an extremely dangerous and life-threatening situation, and as Charlene Aaron reports, it could demolish Puerto Rico.
Residents of Puerto Rico braced for Hurricane Maria after it battered the Caribbean Tuesday as a Category 5 storm. Maria slammed into Puerto Rico today with winds up to 155 miles per hour. It is now expected to turn north away from Florida, but possibly skirting the U.S. East Coast. Puerto Rico's governor calls this the biggest and potentially most catastrophic hurricane to hit Puerto Rico in a century.
This is, without a doubt, the most dangerous storm in our generation.
Thousands have sought refuge in shelters. Some fled to Florida to get away from the storm.
I was so glad, so glad to just get onto that flight and know that it was actually going to take off, you know. It's been a bit of an emotional ride, you know. It's my first hurricane that I suffered with Irma, and I really didn't want to stick around for this next one.
The storm first made landfall in Dominica, the only 5-category hurricane to hit the island.
I believe we got a very bad blow. There appears to be a lot of destruction.
In the neighboring Virgin Islands, the U.S. Navy is evacuating all military personnel ahead of the storm. The massive hurricane is hitting at the same time as people in Mexico are digging through rubble after the devastating 7.1 earthquake hit the region around Mexico City Tuesday. Police, firefighters, and ordinary citizens are searching through collapsed schools, homes, and apartment buildings looking for survivors. This natural disaster happened less than 2 weeks after a magnitude 8.1 quake affected the states of Chiapas and Oaxaca. CBN News captured this video from Tuesday's quake.
People are very agitated, some crying and screaming. I have seen people lying here, probably because of nerves, and they collapsed.
The death toll rose above 200 and is expected to climb. Mexico's president issued a video statement expressing his condolences to those killed in the quake.
Regrettably, many people have lost their lives, including boys and girls in education centers, buildings, and houses. I want to express my condolences to those who lost a relative or a loved one. Mexico shares your grief.
He says this is a very hard time for his country.
This quake is a hard test and very painful for our country. Mexicans, we have had difficult experiences due to quakes in the past, and we have learned to respond to these episodes giving all and with spirit of solidarity.
CBN's Operation Blessing is working to help people in both disaster locations, with cash grants in Puerto Rico and distributing relief supplies in Mexico.
Hi, we're here in Mexico City where a really big earthquake hit today. There's still a lot of affected areas. There's a lot of collapsed buildings still in the city. It's not just this city that's affected, it's also the surrounding towns, Morelia, Cuernavaca, a few others. So Operation Blessing has been mobilizing its mobile kitchens to provide support. The city collapsed with traffic. Everyone's trying to get everywhere, so we mobilized a unit of motorcycles to make sure that we brought water to the affected areas and brought support to those areas that are still collapsed. Thank you so much for everything you do. This can only be done with your support. Thank you so much for helping us to be here.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Thanks, Charlene. I want to caution everybody about reading too much spiritual into this one. I have seen things that just seem to be the judgment of God. You read the Bible, and there are phrases like, the land will vomit you out. That's what it says. But in this case, I just don't see any spiritual significance. Now, I may be missing something, and Wendy has mentioned some of the things that people are saying, but I personally haven't seen anything And I think I'd be very cautious about saying, well, this is God's judgment, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, these are natural disasters. They happen. The earth, tectonic plates shift, and all of a sudden you have an earthquake. And they're devastating. The more people we have on this planet, the more damage is going to be done when one of these natural disasters hits us. But these are horrible hurricanes. I have never, in my lifetime, I cannot remember one after the other of these massive hurricanes. And the islands of the Caribbean are just being decimated. So what we do is to reach out and help people. We do everything we can to alleviate their suffering, and we certainly want to pray for them. Well, in other news, in front of the entire world, President Trump has given North Korea another warning about its nuclear program. Stark, strong leadership. John Jessup has that.
Well, Pat, President Trump gave that warning, as you said, to North Korea during his first address to the United Nations Tuesday, telling the North that the United States will destroy it if it has to. CBN's national security correspondent Eric Rosales has the story.
North Korea's ambassador was in the front row but was seen leaving before President Trump spoke before the 193 members of the United Nations. The commander-in-chief put the rogue nation on notice. The president called on delegates to work together against North Korea's nuclear program, stating if the righteous many do not confront the wicked few, then evil will triumph.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
While the president praised recent UN sanctions against Pyongyang, he emphasized his administration would take action if Kim Jong-un continues to threaten the United States and destabilize East Asia.
No nation on earth has an interest in seeing this band of criminals arm itself with nuclear weapons and missiles. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
It was a very strong speech. I don't think I've ever heard a president threaten to destroy another country.
CBN News spoke with author and senior editor for the Washington Free Beacon, Bill Gertz. He believes North Korea has already proven sanctions are ineffective. His idea, information warfare.
That's the idea of getting the country wired up. Instead of imposing more sanctions, which haven't worked for over a decade, let's loosen sanctions on telecommunications infrastructure, computers and cell phones. Let's get the country wired up, and then let's flood it with real, truthful information about that regime.
Meanwhile, Defense Secretary James Mattis backed up UN Ambassador Nikki Haley's statements by telling reporters Monday the United States is ready to take care of the situation.
Ambassador Haley is correct. There are many military options in concert with our allies that we will take to defend our allies and our own interests.
Secretary Mattis said there are possible military options that would not create a grave risk to Seoul, but didn't elaborate. At 35 miles from the North Korean border, Seoul lies well within artillery range. Beyond other weapons, North Korea is also believed to have a sizable chemical and biological arsenal. The secretary did explain why the U.S. hasn't shot down any North Korean missiles.
The bottom line is that when the missiles, were they to be a threat, whether it be to U.S. territory, Guam, obviously Japan's territory, that would elicit a different response from us.
Mattis wouldn't say any more about the military plans, but did confirm that he discussed with his South Korean counterpart the idea of introducing nuclear weapons to the Korean peninsula. He would not confirm if that was one of the options under consideration. Eric Rosales, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Eric. On the president's schedule today, a meeting with Japan's prime minister and the South Korean president to discuss North Korea. Pat, back to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to tell everybody nuclear war is hideous, horrible. You've seen what was done in Hiroshima and in Nagasaki, Japan, at the end of the Second World War. The death toll was horrific, and the suffering is beyond measure. To loose this genie upon the Korean Peninsula or anywhere else is frankly unthinkable. But what Kim Jong-un is doing He is telling people, we are going to incinerate the United States. We have weapons that can capable of doing it. We are building thermonuclear weapons. We have hydrogen bombs, the big, powerful ones that may have 50, 60 times the power of the nukes dropped on Nagasaki, and we will use them in the United States. We will incinerate you. Now, that's what that old man, that young kid is saying. Is he crazy? Is this bluster? What is it? Well, we cannot allow that to happen. So the choices before our leadership are just horrendous. And I would call on prayer for everyone. They need the wisdom of God Almighty. But there is no easy solution. But the thing is, once the genie is out of the bottle, God help every one of us. John?
Pat, well, here in Washington, Senate Republicans tentatively have agreed on a plan for a major tax cut. The goal is to strengthen the economy and help it grow faster by cutting tax rates for both businesses and individuals. The tax plan has been one of President Trump's top priorities, although some have pushed for a reform of the overall tax code. Others say the Republicans will have to focus on tax cuts for now. Writing for Forbes magazine, Steve Forbes says there simply isn't enough time for a significant overhaul of the tax code. Instead, Forbes says Republicans should just aim for big tax cuts. Go big, and if some changes are subsequently needed, do them later, but go big immediately. Pat, sounds a lot like something you've been saying.
Exactly the same thing. I want to congratulate Steve Forbes. This is the 100th anniversary of Forbes magazine. It is a tremendous publication. It's read by many, many people, influential people in the business community. And Steve has been a leader in terms of rational analysis of monetary policy. He is at the forefront. So my congratulations, Steve. Happy birthday to you guys at Forbes magazine. Wendy?
Before we go to the break, I just have to ask you this question. It's bugging me. So why? Okay, so Kim Jong-un, he wants to blow up America, but why? I mean, what are the motives behind him? Just because he can? Just because he...
I think when you're ego-centered, ego-driven, you want to be a big shot. And the way to be a big shot is to tweak the tail of the big tiger, and that's the U.S. And so he looks strong in the eyes of his people. He doesn't realize what the consequences of these acts are. He's a kid. He's not an experienced diplomat or leader. He's a kid. And he has been raised in a bubble. They don't have the access to the news that we do.
Yeah.
And he doesn't understand the consequences of his action. So, I mean, what would you do if you had a 5 or 10-year-old and he gets his hands on a .45 fully armed, and he comes running downstairs, look, Mommy.
Well, like you said, we got to pray. That's all we can do right now, and pray for our leaders.
God's got to restrain him, but it is a crime family that's running a country that is a crime family. His grandfather was put in place by the Russians. He was a lieutenant colonel, and he was put in by the Russians as a Russian puppet, and they have deified him, not idolized him. They've deified him. They've made him into a god. And the way the repression of the Korean people is simply appalling. And I don't know if Bill Gates says let's wire them. I think, frankly, that's a little late.
Yeah.
But what we can do is, I think we ought to start with cyber warfare. We ought to shut them down. We can shut down, if NSA gets on the case, we can cripple any communications those people have. And I think that's the way to go rather than to talk about nuclear bombs. So we'll see. All right.